Heritage Merit Badge Requirement Number 2. In this requirement, we are going to learn some more about Mr. William Boyce and also about Mr. James West. They were two very instrumental people in the early Scouting movement here in America. We are also going to learn about the first World Scouting Jamboree and some more details about Brownsea Island. So, everyone get out your pencils and your Merit Badge workbook and get ready to follow along. Mr. William Dixon Boyce was very influential in the early Scouting movement. You may remember him from the story of the Lone Scouter in Requirement 1. We're going to learn a little bit more about him, though, in this requirement. Boyce was not much of an outdoorsman and would more than likely be described as a hard-headed businessman instead. He established himself as a successful newspaper publisher in Chicago. By the early 1900s, his Saturday Blade was the largest weekly paper in America. His newspaper was so successful that he was earning an estimated $350,000 a year. That's equal to about $9.4 million a year today. Boyce believed in treating his newsboys right, and that their job of selling newspapers taught them about responsibility and manners and helped prepare them for the future. One of the reasons for Boyce's success was the army of up to 3,000 newsboys he employed across the country. He felt responsible for their welfare and saw the work as a way they could gain valuable skills and become self-sufficient. In 1909, he took that famous trip to London where he was helped by that lone scout when he got lost in the fog. In 1910, Boyce incorporated the Boy Scouts of America. He really had no interest in running the BSA, though. He turned leadership over to Edgar Robinson, the senior Boys' Work Secretary of the YMCA's International Committee in New York. Boyce agreed to give the BSA $1,000 per month for operating expenses. The only condition was that boys of all races and religions be included, and that was the extent of his involvement. He provided the funds necessary to get the BSA off the ground and make it successful. James E. West had a rough childhood. He was orphaned at the age of 6 and crippled by tuberculosis. He actually had to fight to attend school outside his orphanage, and only if he kept up his required chores. He had worked hard, though, and graduated high school with honors. He kept studying and then graduated law school, too. Because of his troubles as a child, his primary focus in law was on the welfare of children. He pushed for the creation of a juvenile court, worked for organizations like the YMCA and the Washington Playground Association, and convinced President Theodore Roosevelt to convene a children's conference at the White House. He even volunteered to defend a boy in court who had stolen his car. West agreed to take the job as Chief Scout Executive for up to 6 months and wound up staying for 32 years. West appeared on the cover of Time magazine, which did an article about the logistical challenges of the first National Scout Jamboree in 1937. You, the Scout, have a lot to thank West for. Most importantly, West is credited with persuading the BSA to add brave, clean, and reverent to the Scout law. You may remember me mentioning something about Brownsea Island in the video for Requirement 1. It was the location that Lord Baden-Powell held his experimental camp to test his ideas in the paper, Scouting: A Suggestion, in 1907. Boy Scouts continued to camp on Brownsea Island until the 1930s. In 1963, Baden-Powell's wife, Olive Baden-Powell, opened a formal campsite on the island. Then, 10 years later, in 1973, a Scout Jamboree was held on the island. Then, for the 100th year anniversary of the first experimental campout, a celebration for the 2007 Centenary Scouting was held there. In 1917, Baden-Powell wrote, "It is not too much to hope that in the years to come, with increasing numbers joining this fraternity in the coming generation, they will unite in personal friendship and mutual understanding such as never before, and thus find a solution to these horrendous international conflicts." It was then that the idea for a World Scouting Jamboree came to life. The first World Scout Jamboree was held in July of 1920 in London, England. It was at this first World Jamboree that Baden-Powell earned the title Chief Scout of the World. No other Scouter has ever held such a title since. The first World Scout Jamboree served its purpose well. In a world ravaged and torn apart by World War I, the first Scout Jamboree proved that even though we live in a world of many differences, we can always find common ground through the brotherhood of scouting. I will finish this up with another quote from Baden-Powell. It was taken from his closing speech at the end of the first Jamboree. Brother Scouts, differences exist between the peoples of the world in thought and sentiment, just as they do in language and physique. The Jamboree has taught us that if we exercise mutual forbearance and give and take, then there is sympathy and harmony. If it be your will, let us go forth fully determined that we will develop among ourselves and our boys that camaradereship through the worldwide spirit of the Scout Brotherhood, so that we may help to develop peace and happiness in the world and goodwill among men. Well, that brings us to the end of Requirement 2. I hope you all had fun and I didn't bore you all too much. As I said earlier, feedback is a gift, so please don't hesitate to leave me a note if you have any problems or questions.